Welcome back to You Must Be Woking and to our mini-series In the Spotlight, where we're taking our same ethos of having honest and sometimes difficult conversations on the topic of diversity and inclusion, but by shining a spotlight on guests who can bring to life some of the topics and issues that have had a real impact on today's workplaces. In an industry that needs to hire 250,000 new workers in the next 5 years, what's holding us back from finding them? The answer might be right in front of us. Today, we're exploring the topic of D&I and all things culture in the construction sector.
And today, Craig and I are very delighted and thrilled to be joined by somebody at the very top of their game in the construction world. And he has all the power in his hands to drive real change. Please join us in welcoming John Wilkinson, Chief Operating Officer of BAM UK and Ireland. Welcome, John.
Thanks very much, Dawn and Craig. Real privilege, actually. Thanks for inviting me and very much looking forward to doing the session with you both.
Fabulous.
Really
you may
good.
Not be saying that.
Well, I'm sure I will, but...
No, it'd be great. It's really good to have you with us. I want to start, though, if I can, and this might be a bit uncomfortable for you. I want to talk about you a bit more before we get into the construction sector. So tell us a bit more about you. How did you go from, I believe I've read this correctly, an engineer starting out many, many years ago to at the top of the boardroom table?
Yeah, I suppose, I've been fortunate. I think that's the first thing to say. You need a little bit of luck in life. But I also think I've tried to work hard and tried to improve myself, generally all the time. I mean, back when I'd finished my A-levels, I wanted to actually go in the police force.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that didn't work out because of quite a nasty injury that I got playing football. And then I literally fell into the industry. It was a case of I applied for a few jobs. And I actually got offered 2 roles at the same time. One with the old DSS, the Department of Social Security. I'd done computer science, and I got offered a role with Cluxton Construction, a local construction company in my hometown of Scunthorpe, which is where I'm born and bred. And I literally only took that particular role, to be perfectly honest, because it paid £500 a year more than the DSS. And I suppose I was very fortunate. I ended up working with a whole host of really great people, initially on projects. Started out, as you say, Craig, as a trainee engineer, so very much got that formative type training. And then ultimately just moved really through the ranks, if that's the right way of saying it. So as I moved from a trainee engineer into sort of like site management, and then up to sort of like project director roles, and the last project that I was actually a project director was in my now hometown of Newcastle, where my good lady wife Laurie is born. And while I was doing that project, the company I was working for, there was a bit of a disagreement at the board level, and I was asked to pick up the role of managing director of their infrastructure business, which at the time I always remember thinking, is that something I wanted to do? Because I really enjoyed that sort of like site project life, seeing a project through from, conception right the way through to execution and completion. And then I suppose there was a little bit of self-doubt as well. I think I was a reasonable project director. By no way am I the best civil engineer in the world. But I remember at the time thinking to myself, when I think it was Richard Branson who said, if you get offered an opportunity and you don't know how to do it, then take it and learn.
Screw it, just do it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And so really, that was the way I moved out of sort of like the technical sort of like delivery aspect into more wider business management. And then like I say, really, I've been quite fortunate. I think I've had a great career, and I've worked for some of the big organisations in the UK, Kier, Lang O'Rourke, obviously, and now I find myself running BAM UK and Ireland. I did spend a little bit of time across in Canada as well with S&C Lavalin, which was a great experience for, the whole family. But I think also, interestingly as well, gave me a different perspective in terms of cultures. Okay. And cultures are very important, particularly in this role that I'm doing now, where, BAM is a company that operates in 2 core geographies of the UK and Ireland and the Netherlands, but ultimately the parent company is a Dutch-based organisation. And I think, understanding those different aspects of cultures and the way that people think and operate has, I think helped me along the way, as well as a bit of continued education and a bit of self-reflection, which I think as we've seen invariably, society changes almost constantly, and the requirements for societal needs, but also the people working in our business is now completely different, dare I say, from what it was when I started in the industry in the late 80s.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of my
love that
of my journey, so to speak.
You've literally seen it all then in the construction sector.
I've seen an awful lot, to be honest. I joined, like I say, late 80s. Dare I say, a very traditional alpha male type environment, full of big, burly men, with probably some, behaviors that we would find very inappropriate in today's society. I mean, that was the time, and that's where it was. It was a very undiverse industry. If you ever saw a female, as an example, it was very much in the secretarial space of project execution. And I think it was actually my third or fourth project that I actually saw a female engineer coming into the industry. Wow. Yeah. So I've seen a whole host of everything move and change and shift. I worked in my early part of my career, it was quite a hierarchical industry. You did as you were told. Yeah. If it was a case of you need to be in the top of Scotland on a Monday morning, I would think nothing of setting off at, midnight on a Sunday to make sure I was there. And I think, those sort of aspects of the way the younger generation think these days is, a lot more about that work-life balance, to be perfectly honest. So, things have changed enormously. And on the profession side as well, the introduction of technology and all those great things.
I'm very excited to talk about the technology in the sector as well, because I think it's a big driver for people entering the space. I'm also really keen to just touch on some of that cultural stuff that you talked about and what you've seen over the years, because I think you're fair to say wasn't a very diverse sector many, many years ago. But that is changing, right? The dial's shifting, and you've probably seen it more than most, having worked for lots of different organizations and for such a long period of time. That is definitely shifting the dial. It's not where we want it to be, right? But it's moving.
I think the whole piece, right the way through diversity and inclusion has moved enormously. If I reflect probably 20 years ago when we started to see, we just talk about gender diversity at this moment in time, females that were coming into the industry were very much coming into areas like finance or human resources, those sort of areas. I'm very proud to say that, in BAM, we have a huge cohort of females in the industry that are now on the technical side. And all these roles are so very important, as your opening comment about the need for significant resources in this industry. That's the only way we're really going to get the resource requirements that we need and the resource levels that we need, by really making, construction very diverse and very inclusive, and recognizing that that's not just about gender diversity, that's diversity in the wider piece, and then the inclusion piece of recognizing that the workforce is moving and changing and shifting, and those requirements, whether that goes right the way through the basics of how do you set up a project to make sure that there are such basic things, as individual toilets for ladies, and then you move into areas of, things like pregnancy, and then you can get onto the ethnicity piece. It's great to see that we see, a whole host of ethnic individuals coming into the industry, a lot from abroad as well. And things like disability, and we do a lot as an organisation with various forums in our company. So disability at BAM, we're very highly engaged with the armed forces, as an example, for bringing people who are coming out at the end of their forces career into the industry. So we have to make this industry diverse, and we have to make it truly inclusive. Because if we don't do that, we can't build the things that society needs, and there's a huge demand out there. Yeah,
well, it's interesting because we normally start the episodes with a kind of a news story, and Dawn and I were looking through some different options to pick a news story for this episode, and I read something from a chap called Jim McClelland, who's a speaker, writer, and commentator about construction sector, and he had an article recently, didn't he, that said construction's future is clear. DEI or DIE, die. And it's a really strong sentiment, isn't it? Because that then led us to look in a little bit more detail. And this calculation or this estimate that the industry is short about 250,000 people in order to meet the demands of infrastructure needs for the UK. And this is not just limited to the UK as well, because I've read similar reports in Australia, for example. They're having exactly the same issues. And there's a huge gap in terms of the numbers. We've got an aging population, so people are retiring, lower birth rates, not as many people coming in. The gap is constantly widening. And therefore, gender as one strand of diversity, but more broadly, diversity of individuals is a route to closing that gap.
No, I think it's a great observation by Mr. McClelland. If you look, and you're right, we're talking UK here. Now, I think we're in a very interesting point in terms of the evolution of, engineering and the built environment. A lot of things that we are, now doing are not only just right for society, whether that's carbon, and we can look at the huge energy transition that's going on, but a lot of the infrastructure which we've got, which was built post-war, is now getting to a place where it needs replacement. So that demand for services from the construction industry is only ever growing. To do that, we need people. Yeah. And to do that, we have to make this environment and this industry attractive to everybody that's coming out of either A-levels or post-degree or whatever it looks like. So, and that remains a really true focus for us at BAM, because we're just not, this industry is not easy. And it has a bit of a reputation, let's be candid about it. I think a reputation that is shifting and moving quite quickly. But, to create those environments, you have to look after individuals and you have to make this about the people. And we very much thrive as an organisation. And I know it's something that all businesses will talk about, people are our core asset, but they truly are in our organisation. Without people, we cannot deliver and execute what we need to deliver. And the only way to do that is to make our workplace, and if I talk just purely about BAM, as attractive as we possibly can. But I think you're also seeing quite a significant shift in the industry about how the industry is positioning itself, the future career opportunities it gives. And that's not about just being a big, burly male who can work in the winter or whatever it is. It's about making the environment a attractive place.
And I think that whole conversation in families has changed, though, hasn't it? People don't tend to sit round the dinner table every evening and have that conversation about, well, at 11 you're going to do these options, and at 15 you're going to do this, and then you're going to follow me into this sector. That just doesn't seem to happen anymore.
No, it doesn't. And I think, we deliberately place a lot of focus in that early career space. We take significant amounts of apprentices into the organisation, like I say, traditionally post A-level, but we also take quite a lot of graduates into our organisation. And then we spend a lot of time talking to them about the opportunity that's in front of them and the way that they can influence some of the things that they're really passionate about. And I do find the generation that is coming into this industry is really focused on things like diversity and things like inclusion. They recognize the need for that, and they recognize the need to embrace the difference that we have across society. And then you can move into other areas. Sustainability is a big area for us as we talk about things like biodiversity and carbon reduction. So, when I joined, you very much spoke about project execution in the way of, can you deliver it safely? Can you deliver good quality on time, on program, to the cost base? We're delivering so much more now. And, I had a superb trip, actually, the week before last. I went up to Peterhead to one of our big projects where we're delivering a big HVD substation. And I've got a cohort of people there that are literally working in the middle of nowhere. They're not too far from Peterhead, but, they are really integrated as a project team, and it is completely diverse. I think it's, it's probably not 50-50 in terms of gender, but it's probably 40-60, which is something that you wouldn't see years ago. But to see how they collaborate, and, they're talking to me about, I'm asking them, so what do you actually do? Well, we've got houses up here and we all share houses, and one night a week we go and play golf together, and then one night a week we have a movie night together. And it's just so great to see, people, not just of a gender difference, but, from a whole diverse background, really integrating and really, candidly having the time of their lives, to be honest. And they're all, they've all got such big smiley faces. And it's just, it makes me really, passionate to keep working in the industry, but, at the end of the day, incredibly proud of what we're trying to deliver as BAM. And I think the way that the industry is trying to shape up.
Yeah. It's that sense of community and that sense of
great.
Mini cultures that exist,
Yeah.
isn't it? I love that, because that reminds me of when I was learning and when I was training and coming up through the ranks and stuff. We had similar communities as well. And yeah, love that. One of the things I'm really interested to talk about, because you touched on it a little bit, is around this attracting new talent and starting with, schools, universities, those kind of things. One of the things that I read when I was looking at the Australia model, because they're having similar issues over in Australia, and we've got a couple of clients out there. But what I thought was fascinating was one of our clients now in the mining industry, they're going into schools, right? Not universities. So they're trying to get in even earlier now into schools. And they're on parents' evenings and things. They're putting stands up to tackle or to demonstrate the technology they're using and the link to things like sustainability and the green agenda and stuff, so that they attract the children at that age, but also they're attracting the parents. So linking to your conversation, Dawn, about that.
Big piece around parents. And in fact, they're taking it into primary school. Mm-hmm. So they've introduced business games as young as 4 or 5 years of age, and they are engaging parents at those key points to try and encourage some of that traditional encouragement.
Yeah.
But yeah, hugely successful program.
And it's really cool, isn't it, that people are thinking that way now, to say, look, we need to start influencing children. Because I think one of the biggest things that I find quite frightening, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit about this within BAM in a second, but is technology and the use, but equal, people are scared about AI and what that means. So 5 years ago, we were telling people learn coding, and now we're saying we don't need to code because AI can do it for you, right? Yeah. But actually, traditional construction is probably one of the safer areas for you to learn a trade and a skill now. The amount of people that keep saying to me, we still need plumbers, we still need bricklayers, we still need, all of these things, traditional roles. And then you layer on top of that the engineering skills and the technology skills. That, construction should be an attractive place for talent in the next 10, 15 years, right?
Yeah, I absolutely totally agree. I think, there's I think sometimes there's a bit of stuff in the media that I don't necessarily agree with. There's always this slant on construction. Is it really embracing technology in the right ways? And, if I look at my career, 30 years ago, if you've not studied sort of like maths, physics at A level, you were not getting onto a civil engineering degree. It was a very difficult degree course to get onto, very highly theoretical, very technical. We don't need that now. If you look at, you just mentioned AI, I remember when I was a young engineer, working out, maximum permissible bending moments in structural members. You don't need to do that now, because we have computer software that you put in the span of a bridge, and you put in the skew of a bridge, and you put in the load, and it tells you, well, it's that, and it's that. And then, the whole piece of, how do you really get involved with children early to get them to understand what this industry is all about? And we're quite fortunate, actually, because we do a huge amount of work for education, in effect, directly for government, for the Department for Education, building a lot of schools. One of their requirements is that we actually, produce a huge amount of social value. So that's not just about taking people in to the workforce, but actually educating children that already are in the schools. And I have a great little story around this, actually. And I mentioned earlier the high-level bridge in Newcastle that was the last project that I was the project director on. And I organised a visit for school children because this was it was a bridge opened in 1846, I believe, by Queen Victoria. This is how long this goes back. But a fascinating project. And we brought a whole host of school children on, spent a bit of time talking to them about the basics of engineering, and then did a site visit, because this bridge was basically stripped back to nothing. One of the school children, and these were sort of like 7, 8-year-olds, and one of the school children happened to be one of my friends' children, who is now in civil engineering.
Wow.
And he always talks to me about, it was that experience and the fact that, he just found it so intriguing that became the career he wanted to pursue.
Love that.
And I think if you can give them that experience, and then you can talk about, if I dare say, generations have shifted. When my parents, God bless them, when they grew up and worked in the area they were born, traditionally. I think my generation had that opportunity to probably grow up in the place they were born, but work across the UK. I think the generation now has the opportunity to work worldwide.
Yeah,
there's such a huge...
And it's so easy to do that, isn't it? And in coming back to your earlier point, that point about the stereotypical nature or perception of the sector, couple that with the generational differences and the fact that our children, anybody under about 30, is being taught that there is no limit in terms of global work. It brings me to want to turn the attention to you for a second, if I may, in terms of,
no pressure.
Well, you know I don't like talking about myself, but carry on.
You'll love this. We've had the pleasure of working together for some time, and I know that you take this topic of culture very seriously, but my question is, how have you held yourself accountable and your board accountable for the importance of these things you're talking about for different generations or indeed culture?
First I would say that, I educated myself. I had to educate myself as you move away from that project sort of like role into more corporate governance. And if you look at the corporate governance code, talks very much about the importance of culture within an organization. That to one side, I recognized, and, I have a daughter who studied anthropology. And I think, I learn as much from my children and the younger generation in BAM as I do from anybody else in the industry, to be perfectly fair. And Craig will remember this. When I first took this role, one of the things that was, society was moving very quickly at pace in terms of the way that people identified themselves. And candidly, I'd grown up in that stereotypical environment. And I think if you're going to be a leader, you have an obligation to the business, but also to yourself, to educate yourself in these trends that are emerging. And, myself and Craig had several, Teams calls around this. And I always remember Craig saying to me, he said, "Look, John," he said, "you don't need to be an expert around this, but you need to have a core understanding so that when you're engaging, you can ask the right questions in the right way." So I reflected on that as myself and then really pushed this into the organization, because I'm a firm believer that 99.999% of people come to work to do the right thing in the right way. But actually, we've always focused on areas such as safety and quality of the product, which is very, very important, don't get me wrong. But we haven't necessarily focused on how cultures have evolved and, and how all of a sudden you're getting a wider, more diverse workforce. And what does that look like for those individuals who are in, smaller sort of like demographics or whatever that looks like. So we took a decision as a board that actually culture was a real big enabler for us to really improve BAM. And you've worked with us around that particular piece, and we've done, our cultural discovery work. I like to think that we haven't shied away from some of the difficult decisions, because I think when you do that type of activity, you invariably find things that you don't like to think are there, but possibly because of that lack of education on that space have been there. So we've had to deal with those things, and we still continue on that journey to really make the culture within BAM one that is truly embracing of everybody, irrelevant of gender or race, or different ways of recognizing themselves. That is the only way that we get to improve BAM, to be perfectly honest. And I think my view now is, much like on the theoretical side of the industry, because that changes very quickly, but life does not stop changing. Change is a constant, and the day that we forget that is the day that actually we'll get left behind. So we always need to check in. We need to hold ourselves to account. Are we doing the right things in the right way? And most importantly, we have to give the voice to the employee, because the employees can tell us so much about what is going on. I have a great job, but I sit at the top of an organization, and it's a big organization. So I probably get to see a 10% slice of what's going on through the business because I'm generally dealing with, how do we keep our shareholders happy and all those bits and pieces. But getting our people and giving our people that confidence and that freedom of speech to raise issues that, will make us a better organisation is so important. And we're going to really keep pushing that very hard.
I love that honesty because I think it's so important to recognise this stuff can be difficult and uncomfortable, can't it? What's been the most challenging thing as you've embarked on this change?
Yeah, if I go back to when we formed what is BAM UK and Ireland, we were pulling together, what was in fact 3 very successful businesses in their own right, but with their own individual identities and their own individual cultures. And the biggest opportunity for me was in the scale side of the business and the consistency and the collaboration across the organisation. So I think, that was probably the biggest challenge. At the time, it was setting out a vision, which, there was no facts to base that vision particularly on. So it was about really setting a direction of travel for the organisation. This is where we're going, giving people the narrative and the understanding of why. And I think, I sit now confidently, quietly confident, along with the rest of the UK and Ireland divisional leadership team, where we can actually start showing the facts of that journey. We are in a much better place financially. Which is great for the whole organisation. I think, we continue to grow the business. We continue to, increase our employee base. And we continue to work on those core areas. So I think, the difficult piece was setting the vision and explaining to people why it was so important. It's now starting to get a little easier because we can back that up by fact. And, BAM has been around for a long time. So invariably, you always get this piece of, well, who's this new guy who just joined us and, why should we believe him and follow him and this, that and the other? Yeah. But I think in general terms, it's worked really well. And I'm very proud of what we've achieved, as an organisation. And that's credit to all, 6,800 employees we have, but also to our supply base. And it's not just been about improving the results. It's about improving the environment in which we operate and which our people come to work in.
Yeah, I love that. You call that the BAM experience, don't you?
We do, yeah.
Underpinned by your values and all of that.
Absolutely.
I love that. This episode of You Must Be Woken is brought to you by Metamer Global, the creators of the award-winning Return on Inclusion platform. In the current climate, it's so important to be able to demonstrate the impact of our efforts to create more inclusive workplaces. For the first time ever, organizations like yours can assess the work you've done and benchmark your efforts with assurance and accreditation, even comparing your results with your competitors. Not only that, but the ROI tool will calculate the estimated financial return for every £1 you've invested in your D&I efforts. To find out more about how you can assess your return on inclusion, visit the website www.metamer.global. When you hang up your boots and your high vis, or you leave BAM and you go and do something different, what do you want to leave behind? What do you want your legacy to be in this space?
So I've always, and my team and probably the whole business get bored.
Not that I'm trying to retire you too early.
No, but they maybe get bored of me because I remember, when we were setting this journey out and we were setting the reasons, the rationale of why we had to change. I always, and I like my rugby as well. I've always been quite a big sporty sort of like individual, whether it was football, golf, and I'm a big rugby fan as well. And I always remember, the New Zealand, the All Blacks motto being "Leave the jersey in a better place." So I want to, I think my only obligation now is to leave BAM in a better place tomorrow than it is today. And that's for that future generation coming through. So let's really unlock the power of the business and the people within it, recognizing that we have to do everything through diversity, inclusive behavior, the voice of the employee which we've just spoke about, but continue to drive the quality of of our results and our performance. Sure. And that should make it, my obligation is to make it easier for that generation coming behind me, because they will equally face as much change as I faced in the 30. I think this is, I always get, you can tell how old I'm getting now, Craig, because I can't remember whether this is my 37th or 38th year in this industry. But that's always been my sort of like mantra.
Nice.
You know, improvement is a continuum, and I've always said to myself that the day I genuinely believe that I've got nothing else to learn is a day, you know, it's my obligation then to retire because I'm not going to be able to add anything to the business.
Yeah. One of the things, if I can, I'll share with you one of my observations about BAM as an organization in this space as well, which I thought was unusual when I first started working alongside BAM. But now I've come to really admire about your organization is this belief in a sustainable tomorrow, right? So the belief that we can build things in a different way, whether that be schools or hospitals or roads or whatever that is, right, for countries that need them, but in a way that's really sustainable. And you've really kind of, as an organization, you've gone for that green agenda in a really challenging way, which must be expensive as an organization to do, but actually you're quite committed as an organization to that.
Yeah, I think, you know, very committed, I would say. You know, we looked at, you know, what is it that society needs? And you can talk about sustainability in a whole host of different directions. You know, I think we talk about sustainability, about the carbon impact at this moment in time, and there's definitely a way we can impact on that. You know, we talk about things like biodiversity, nature positive, nature inclusive, actually, is a terminology that we're now using. You know, because I can remember from my, you know, growing up, you know, one of the things I used to do in my summer holidays was catch butterflies. You know, in the old jam jar, puncture a few holes and put a few weeds and that and this and that. You don't see them now. You know, then you can talk about sustainable in terms of people. Yeah. You know, and our conversation is about this industry will not be sustainable until we make it sustainable from a human perspective and from a people perspective. So we looked at that and we thought, you know, the days of, you know, what I said previously around quality, cost, program, safe, they are still very, very important. But our clients are demanding much more from us. And these things move, you know, and we should never talk politics, and we're not going to. But, you know, we had change in political power across in the States, and, you know, it was drill, baby, drill, and this is all rubbish and this. We generally do not believe that. You know, there is a better way in which this industry can deliver for society. And I think by bringing all those things in and getting people to recognize it's not just necessarily about the asset that's been constructed, it's the way we do that. That's also an angle for attracting difference into the organization as well. Yeah.
And you talk about those conversations in the broader industry. What are they? What are people saying about culture and sustainability?
You know, I would like to think we're probably slightly ahead. But I do think, you know, the industry in general terms is beginning to wake up and understand that, you know, the old way of doing things is not the right way any longer. So there is a lot of work going in across industry bodies about how do you make the industry more sustainable, more attractive. That's, you know, to people coming into the business. So I don't see this going away. I really don't. You know, there will be the usual, you know, flavors of today that, you know, they'll become tomorrow's fish and chip paper and this, that, and the other. But actually, we know we cannot continue building things that the way that we built them. Interestingly, you know, you even saw government stepping into that only a couple of years ago with Michael Gove, whether you like him or not, but his position that, you know, Marks and Spencers do not demolish your main building because all the carbon, as an example, is predominantly in the ground and in the concrete frame. And we've had this, you know, we've had an ability, and it's not just in the UK, but generally, you know, when an asset gets aged, we knock it down and rebuild. Well, actually, you need to think in a different way. And the economic side of things are different. Inflation's been rife. So building things is becoming more and more expensive. So there's a whole host of when you say sustainable, you can put that against nature. You can put that against people. You can put that about economic sustainability as well. You know, there's a huge facet to that.
The reason I kind of brought it up was because, to Dawn's point, it's interesting to see what the industry is doing. And I think the industry is turning inwards towards that now. And I think BAM led the way in essence around some of that. But talk to me about some of your projects, because I think these projects that you do are really attractive to that next generation of talent. And if we're going to close this skills gap, then we've got to be able to show people what we mean when we say we're more inclusive or we're more diverse, we're building things differently. So wasn't there a school in Scotland somewhere that you've built recently, or an education something, and it's world leading, right?
It was the biggest, what we call passive house school in the world. In Dunfermline that we completed probably about 12 months ago now. And this is basically, in effect, it's neutral in operation. So it doesn't emit carbon, it generates its own energy. The actual, the embedded carbon there is equal to the benefit of energy going back into the network that it produces, and so on and so forth. So, we can't get away, I don't think, from a UK energy position that we need to be, becoming more reliable as a geography in production of our own energy. So, and the way that we build those things. You talk about schools as an example. The majority of the schools we're building now are flooded with PV, solar panels, all across the roof, because the DFE have gone, well, actually, these need to stand up on their own footprint. And one of the biggest costs to any business at this moment in time, government included, is the cost of energy. Yeah. But it's not just that, it's the environments as well. We have people working in the Antarctic, as an example, on the British Antarctic Survey. And I often challenge some perceptions, I think, that, we talk about this generation possibly not being as mobile as the generation when I was under the hierarchy of, John, you need to be there by 7 o'clock on Monday morning. I don't really care how you get there, just make sure you're there. When we go out to it's amazing how many of our younger generation want to go and have experiences of working in places like the Antarctic.
It's the one continent I've never worked in. Take me. If there's one thing I do before I do retire, is I should definitely go out and see the team there. It's one of those journeys.
By the sounds of it.
But those things I think are so important for this younger generation. They've seen the impact, and I'm fortunate. I work with a good supervisory board in BAM as well, and our chair, who's a great individual, he was very much involved in the motor industry, and he has a great terminology, and he says that his was the generation that really created wealth in the world. And I won't use his exact words, but he said we messed up the world by doing it in the way that we did. Okay. So not only is it important for the likes of me, it's a really important driver from the board level right the way down and through the organisation. And then, when we get these cohorts working, or we work on specific stretch assignments around this topic, this is when we bring the younger generation through, because they're incredibly passionate about it, which is number one, but also very knowledgeable about it.
Yeah.
Earlier today, we were talking about the power of mentoring and the power of coaching. And as somebody who can no longer claim to be in the younger generation, speaking on behalf of that tier of the workforce who are all going to live to 100 and therefore are going to be with you for another 40 years, there's huge opportunity there too, though, isn't there?
Yeah, massive. And we I mentor 2 people in our organisation, as does the rest of the DLT, and I use that, probably selfishly, for reverse mentoring as well. Because I do, and this comes back to one of my core points, is the obligation individually to keep yourself fresh and refreshed on what's happening in the world, because it moves at such a pace, and you lose a view as you get older, I think, on certain dynamics that are going on in people's lives. So hopefully, as valuable as my mentoring some of our future talent that's coming through the organisation, it's so beneficial for me just to listen. And I'm probably not the best at practicing this, but I always try and remember, 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in proportion. And just to ask the inquisitive questions, because I think that's really important. And I think that's when you get true engagement, when people understand that you want in from them as much as they want from you. And that...
and the power of those multi-generational teams is huge.
Yeah, it's absolutely massive,
Can be huge. I want to just turn us quickly, and I'm conscious that we've got listeners around the world, but I want to just talk a little bit about the UK, because recently the new industrial, or the modern industrial strategy, was released. And from my reading of it, there were 2 big planks within that. So the first was for organizations to understand the skills gap that we've got, and therefore there's a huge amount of work, and the government are investing huge tons of money in to try and plug in that skills gap. And then the second bit was around technology adaptation, so taking on the use of new technology and stuff. So just we've talked a little bit already around how you're doing the skills stuff from attracting the talent into the industry, but what from a skills perspective is BAM trying to contribute, and then what kind of technology adaptation have you already started? Are you planning to do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's massive actually. I think maybe just to pick up on the skills shortage piece is that one thing that we are doing is we're doing what we call strategic workforce planning.
Right.
And this is where actually it's very beneficial for government to give future visibility around pipeline of opportunity, because that means we can then invest with confidence. So we're now looking at, what sort of skills we're going to need in 2030 and beyond. And the longer the tail on our pipeline of projects or our order book, the more benefit that gives us to be able to plan properly around that piece.
And invest, I suppose.
And invest, right? Yeah, because it's all about, it's all about investing with confidence, and that's business in general terms, isn't it? But if you look at technology, I mean, it's a fascinating one for me, and I see it, I've just had a great month actually, because it's been the summer holidays. That's given me a lot of opportunity to travel around the UK and across into Ireland and see some of our projects. And I see things now that, I really wish they were around when I was sort of like delivering projects. We used to talk a whole host of things like, hand-arm vibration. It was a big issue in our industry with vibrating equipment. Everything I see now on our sites is almost remote control. Right the way through, big heavy whacker plates compacting stone, right the way through, robots demolishing bits of an asset, which was previously done by, dare I say, big men with jackhammers, pneumatic hammers, and this, that, and the other. But also other areas as well, and it's always been a slight bugbear of mine around this industry is that as engineers, we love solving problems.
Yeah.
And therefore, what we tend to do is reinvent the wheel on every single time we go and deliver something. And, I always use the terminology that engineers have been trying to reinvent the wheels for the last, 100,000 years. And guess what? It's still round. But actually what we're using now, and, things like we've got a piece of technology that we're using now called BuildDot. And this is literally where AI comes into it. So our engineers can now go around, scan a particular location on a building, do a 360-degree camera survey, and then they go back and plug it into this software, and it tells them the program for the actual project is integrated into the software, and using the database of, because when you build a school, you don't generally build them differently. And if the AI generation can tell you whether you're on program or what areas are starting to become critical, and therefore where you need to increase your workforce or increase productivity or whatever it looks like. Previously, that was all done by human perception. And we all know that humans' perceptions is different.
Sure.
So this is about driving predictability. So, there's a few examples of that. When I was an engineer, I used to spend my days carrying big instruments everywhere, and I used to have what in those days we used to call a chain boy or chain girl, who was the individual who held the prism or the staff or whatever, to take levels and this, that, and the other. Now I see our engineers with one instrument just running around, and this instrument's literally following them everywhere. Then so the whole, and you said something at the beginning, Craig, that pricked my conscience a little bit, because AI is a bit of an unknown territory, and to a degree, it can be, you could see it as being scary or disruptive. I actually think the benefits of this, and it's like everything in life, the way that it's controlled and governed will be really important, but the ability of that to simplify execution and to create predictability for our people is something that we're only just starting to tap into.
Yeah.
But it just continues to change on a day-to-day basis. It's fascinating.
Love that. And for people, for the younger generation coming through, thinking about careers in different spaces, that's exciting, right? How do we get to use that technology to build the things that we're passionate about, to build the infrastructure that our country needs, all of these kind of good things? I mean, you're doing a huge amount of work in the energy sector, right? So you're creating a different world for us in the UK in terms of how we create and use energy. And that's a big passion for the next generation.
What a huge opportunity. And the great thing is about this is, we're talking about green energy, but we're talking about UK resilience in terms of its own energy production. But, you probably read 3 months ago about the UK government finally committing to the Rolls-Royce consortia on small modular reactors, which we're part of that supply chain. This is fascinating. This is really cutting edge stuff, and you can see a pipeline of this. This isn't going to be, building for 10 years. This is going to be building for 30, 40, 50. So as now a time to come into this industry where you can go build really cutting edge future technology for societal needs. And, we talk about AI. Somebody told me something fascinating, and I can't back this up with fact, but somebody told me that an AI search takes as much energy as toasting a piece of bread, whereas a Google search is the equivalent energy usage of an LED light bulb for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
So you talk about energy need to drive society and to drive AI, and we know Microsoft's of the world building data centers everywhere and this, that, and the other. So I just think it's a fascinating time for the whole industry. And I'm slightly biased, aren't I? I'm bound to be, having been 37 or 38 years in this industry. It is a great career, and if you're prepared to work hard, you're prepared to keep learning, and you're prepared to keep listening, then I think it's a career that I would advocate for anybody to go into, because it's just such a fascinating impact. And I take so much pride, when I, even to this day, the odd occasion myself and Laurie go down onto Newcastle Quayside and I look up at the high level bridge, and the memories I have from that collaboration, that team spirit, the way that we operated together to really deliver something that was, very successful, won a huge amount of awards. I had the joys of going to Taormina in Sicily to pick up the European Heritage Award for that particular project. And there's not many careers, I think, where you really leave a big legacy and a big impact on society. And we had one last week in my adoptive county of Northumberland, where we've just completed a school in Seaton Valley, and it is stunning. And that just makes me so proud.
Yeah, love that. Okay, I'm very conscious of time. So before we wrap up and we give you the usual thank you for joining us, I want one more question for you. If you were going to talk to your counterparts across the industry, what 3 things would you like to collaborate on or like to nail in order to make this industry sustainable, better, attractive, to close that skills gap? What 3 things would you like to send a message to everybody?
So I think the industry tries to do quite a bit around collaboration, but I think there's a lot more we can do in terms of marketing the industry. I think we're doing quite a bit, and I think it is changing, but I think we do need to get more into some of the areas that Dawn mentioned. How do we get into early schools? And you can get in right at primary level, to be perfectly honest. I mean, most of us, let's be candid. Well, I shouldn't say most of us. I did. As a kid, what was the first thing you got for Christmas? Lego.
Meccano,
And Meccano. Let's build things, and this, that, and the other. So I think having a joined up approach into the way that we continue to make the industry more attractive, recognizing that, dare I say, the academic side of what was required when I joined is different now. So we're bringing people like gamers into our industry because of everything we've talked about, AI, and, we talk about building things twice in the digital world before we start constructing. So we're needing different skills across the organization. So I think continue to drive the inclusiveness and the collaboration across the industry and making the industry as attractive as possible, and be more confident in the way we talk about it, to be perfectly honest, because, it's such a great career. So that would be number 1. I think number 2 is continuing to push this sustainability drive into how we deliver.
Yeah.
And it's too easy just to talk about sustainable as carbon, because it's not. Sustainable is people, it's nature. I remember the days we were talking before we started this podcast about, Cornwall and Devon. That's where I spent all my holidays with my mother and father and my 2 brothers. I remember my father having to stop every hour and a half to clean the windscreen because, the number of flies or wasps or whatever. You don't have to do that now. And that is a concern. I spoke at the building conference last year about nature, and what could what could the construction industry do to improve nature? And I turned it the other way around. And it's a little bit like Mr. McClellan said, if we don't have nature, we won't have a construction industry.
Yeah.
So really trying to widen that focus, not just on the building of an asset, but the way that we deliver and the way that we execute. So I think that would be number 2.
Okay.
And the third one would be to really keep the drive and focus on the societal shifts that go on. Because it has changed massively and it continues to change. It goes a little bit back to what I said about your own obligation to keep yourself fresh on emerging topics. And, I'm not just saying it because I'm sat on your podcast, Craig. The conversations we had really made me think differently.
Yeah.
I remember a particular conversation about, I just don't feel comfortable in this space. And you put me into my comfortable space where I didn't feel I had to be an expert, but I did feel that I had to have an understanding.
Yeah.
So I think that continuous inquisitiveness to really understand what's going on in the industry, what's going on in wider society, because we've done this in BAM as an example.
Yeah.
Last year, we changed our benefits policies for our people because you came into BAM and if you were Alison, who was just coming in after studying, construction management at 22, you got the same benefits as what John Wilkinson, who's coming to the end of his career at 57 this year. That can't be right.
Yeah.
Because what you need when you're younger is completely different to what you needed when you're older. So, that's one of the big changes. I'll give you I'll finish on one real factual example. I'm very, I think you know this, I'm very wedded to my family. I'm very fortunate. I've got a beautiful wife and I've got 2 beautiful kids. But when my daughter was born, you tend to think this is a long time ago, but it's only 26 years ago. I got 1 day off.
Mm. Mm.
Now we're giving our people, a minimum of a month on paternity leave. Amazing. So for fathers.
Yeah.
And we know that bonding thing is so important when you have new children. So, and, maternity leave now is up to 6 months and so on and so forth. So that's just an example of how in 26 years, and it's not a long time, but that has changed massively, I think. And I think bad on us as an industry that actually it was only 1 day because, it's alpha male and that, just get your wife out of hospital, sit her at home, that'll be all good. You can get on the road again and go deliver stuff. Well, we all know, having had children, that the importance of supporting your wife through that journey, but bonding with your own child is massive. Yeah. So I think that's just a fact of something I've seen in my career that I think is a massive step forward and rightfully so.
Love that. Well, hopefully others in the construction sector will follow suit, join you on your mission with your 3 things.
I think so. I hope so.
And Dawn, it's over to you. I think we're doing our recurring feature with John before we let him go. There's no pressure.
It's our recurring feature, John, where we ask you to talk about your first boss. We've all had them. We can all remember them. Some of us still in touch with them, to be honest. So a little bit about your first boss. What did you learn and what would you not do that they do?
I think probably like us all, I've been very fortunate. I've worked with some great people. I've also worked with some that aren't so great, if I'm candid and honest with you. My first boss was the first engineer I trained under, actually, an individual called Pete Doyle. Who was a fascinating individual. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, actually. But he really took me under his arm, and nothing was too much trouble. I came into this industry knowing nothing. And actually, you're more of a burden for the first probably 12, 18 months of your career as you're soaking up information and this, that, and the other. And nothing was too much trouble, not only just in terms of the 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock time, but also socially as well. He taught me a huge amount about, how you spoke to people and the ability to be able not just to speak up, but the importance of speaking down and listening. Yeah. And that's where we talked about speak up in our organisation. So that was one of the things he taught me. Absolutely fantastic individual, an incredible engineer, incredibly bright individual as well. But he was, what wouldn't I take in? He did come from that generation, which was very alpha male.
Yeah.
So he would say some, very inappropriate things, which wouldn't be tolerated now. Not because he was a nasty individual or anything like that, but it wasn't that way back then.
That's the time.
So, you know, if I was to talk to him today, I would still push him to have that enthusiasm that he had with me to bring me into the industry in the right way, because I think he did. But I would also want to educate him about the way that, you know, all the things we've talked about over the last 30 minutes or whatever, how it's become so important and how he would need to change himself to really fit in today's work culture. But, you know, I have some incredibly fond memories of those days, those times. Not, like I say, not just purely on the 8 till 5 piece, but, you know, from a social background. And he retired a long time ago now, and we remained friends right the way up until he unfortunately passed away last year. But I have. You can probably tell I have some big smiles when I talk about him, and some great reflections.
No, that's great. Thanks, John.
Amazing. Right, so that's it. We're at the end, and you'll be surprised to know it wasn't 30 minutes, it was more like 60 minutes. So time flies.
They always say time flies when you're having fun, so we've obviously had great fun.
It's been brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, giving a real spotlight on the construction industry, because I think it's a huge opportunity for inclusive workplaces everywhere, and some things for people to learn as well. So.
No, and thanks to you both for giving us the opportunity, and I've really obviously enjoyed the conversation, so 30 minutes has been 60. Brilliant.
There you go. Well, listen, a big thank you, as always, for you to listening. We hope you've enjoyed our conversation with John. But until next time, bye from me.
And bye from me.
Thanks for watching and listening to You Must Be Woking, the podcast that cuts through the noise for all things diversity and inclusion. We pride ourselves on having honest and sometimes tough conversations. So if you liked our discussions and content today, please do hit the follow, like, and subscribe buttons. It really helps us to reach more listeners. And if you're feeling even more generous, why not leave us a review? It really is the best way for us to grow and help our content reach even more people. You can also find us on all social media platforms at You Must Be Woking, or search the hashtag YMBWoking, where we continue the conversation, including answering more of your questions. See you soon.